Hi, I'm Patrick Brannon, Mr. Patrick, from the Highlands Biological Station. Today we're going to learn how to observe and identify birds. So what makes something a bird? Well, all birds have feathers. Not all birds fly, but all birds have feathers. Things like penguins and ostriches can't fly, but they do have feathers. This is a flight feather from the wing. You can see it has this nice curved shape. It's called an aerofoil. That helps create lift so the bird can fly. But are all feathers for flying? No. They can be for warmth, like this. And they can also give the bird its color. So things like this can be camouflaged against trees. Here's one from a blue jay. It's nice and bright blue to attract mates. Same with this yellow one. The colors of the birds can help you identify them. But color alone is not enough. This is a blue colored bird, but is it a blue bird? Is it a blue jay? Is it something else? So just the color by itself is not enough. It can help you start, but then you need to look at other details of the bird. This one is actually called an indigo bunting. It has a big, thick black beak, no crest, compared to like the blue jay, which is a larger bird with a white breast, a crest, a black collar. So there's a lot of things that you need to look at to identify a bird. So here's some different parts of birds. You can identify birds in part by the different markings they have. Some may have a stripe over their eye or on their head, or maybe a dark throat. Some may have an eye ring. Others may have markings on their wings, like these wing bars. All of those things will help you to narrow down the species of bird. Another thing that will help you identify birds is the bird's beak shape. Things like cardinals and finches and sparrows have this thick cone-shaped beak that's like a pair of pliers. They use that for cracking open seeds. So a bill shaped like that is a seed eater. Things like woodpeckers need a long, sharp, pointy beak for drilling holes in trees. So it's kind of like a screwdriver or an ice pick. Things like warblers and wrens are insect eaters, and insects are tiny. So they have tiny, thin beaks. They're like a pair of tweezers for picking up those tiny insects. And there are other examples as well. Hummingbirds have a long beak that's like a straw for drinking nectar. Things like ducks and geese have a bill that's like a spoon for scooping things out of the water. So not only can the beak help you identify the bird, it can tell you a little bit about what the bird eats and where it lives. So here are two yellow and black birds, but they're not the same bird. One is called a goldfinch, and the other is a hooded warbler. So let's take a closer look and see what makes them different. So they're both yellow and black, but the goldfinch has white wing bars and a white rump. The hooded warbler has white on its tail. This one is shaped like a V. This one is shaped like a fan. This one has much more yellow on its back. This one has a black cap. This one has a yellow ring around its eye. What about their beaks? The goldfinch, what do you think it eats? It has a cone-shaped beak, like a pair of pliers. So it would be a seed eater. But the hooded warbler has a little thin beak, like a pair of tweezers. So it would eat insects. So those are some examples of the kinds of things you need to look at to help you identify birds. In addition, you can use things like their size, where you find them, and maybe even the time of year. So there are dozens and dozens of bird species in our mountain region, but I'm going to teach you a handful of backyard birds that you should be able to identify. So this is one probably everyone knows. This is the cardinal. It's bright red, but it also has a crest, which distinguishes it from some other red birds. And it has that cone-shaped beak. So what is this bird then? This is also a cardinal, but why isn't it red? Well, this one is the male, this one is the female. Females are usually not as colorful as the males because they have to be camouflaged as they sit on the nest. He's brightly colored to attract mates. He can also lure predators away from the nest. So keep in mind that when you're identifying birds, the males and females can often look different, as can the young. The juveniles are also kind of drab until they get older during the breeding season. But probably even more important than the way they look is the way they sound. Each bird has its own song, and you can usually come up with a little device to help you remember what they sound like. So this is the cardinal again. Cardinals sound like they're saying what, or what cheer, birdie, birdie, birdie. So let's listen to the cardinal. What cheer? So that's the cardinal. So this is another familiar bird. This is the American robin. Robins are large birds with orange breasts and a white eye ring. You often see them hopping around the ground. They sound like they're saying, cheerio, cheery up, cheerio. That's the robin. This is another common bird in our mountains. It's the white-breasted nuthatch. It's a small bird, and it has this unusual behavior of kind of going up and down the sides of the trees, hanging upside down. They have a honking sound. So that's the nuthatch. So this is a very common bird. It's called a chickadee. It's small with a little black cap. It gets its name because it says chickadee. Chickadee-dee-dee. So this is a woodpecker. We have lots of woodpeckers in our region, but this one is called a hairy woodpecker. It's black and white, and the males have a red spot on their head. Woodpeckers sound like they're laughing, ha 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 ha. So that's the woodpecker. So this is one you should probably know. It's the blue jay. It's a large blue colored bird with a long tail, a crest, white breast. It sounds like it's fussing at you. It's very scolding, like this. Meh, meh, meh. It also sometimes makes another sound. It's kind of like weedle deedle. Anyway, that's the blue jay. This bird is called a catbird. It's a grayish bird with a long tail, kind of like a cat, and a red rump. But it gets the name catbird because it sounds like a cat. It goes meow, meow. So that's the catbird. This is a bird that's very easily recognized by its song. It's called an eastern towhee. It's kind of black and orange, but the song sounds like it says, drink your tea, drink your tea. Or sometimes it'll just say, drink. Anyway, that's the towhee. And lastly, this one is called a tufted titmouse. It has a little tuft on its head, kind of a grayish bird with a little orange there. And it sounds like it says, Peter, 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 Peter. So those are just a few birds that you should be able to recognize even in your own backyard, either by sight or by sound. So let's go outside and see what we can find. So the first thing you want to do when you're observing birds is listen. Even if you can't identify the bird, you should be able to tell how many different kinds of birds are calling. So male birds sing to attract mates, but also to define their territories. So let's listen and see how many different birds we can hear. Alright, so listen carefully and you can hear a catbird in the distance. Just then, they'll do it again. Hear it then? Meow! Hear it? Meow! So we could hear the birds, but we couldn't necessarily see the birds. A good pair of binoculars is helpful, but there are ways that you can draw the birds in closer for better viewing. And one of these is making a psh 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 sound. That's an alarm sound that birds make when they sense danger. And sometimes if they hear that sound, they'll fly in to investigate. You can also make the sound of a screech owl. Screech owls are little owls that eat these other songbirds. When the birds hear that, they'll often fly in to try to chase the owl away. The screech owl sound is kind of like this. So let me try to call in some of the birds by making that psh 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 sound. But it takes a few minutes, so you have to be patient. Psh 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 psh. Oop, there's one. All right, so I've called in a bird here. Get all the birds now. It's a cardinal. There's a nuthatch on this tree. See if I can zoom in on him better. Oh, there he is. Now that we've drawn in some birds, we can more closely observe their behavior. Let's do something that's known as an ethogram. We're going to make a list of several bird behaviors. If you want to do fewer, that's fine. If you want to do more, that's fine. But 5 is always good. So I've decided to write down 5 things that birds do. They can fly, they can hop or walk around, they can sit in one place and just turn their bodies, they can eat, and they can sing. So what we're going to do is we'll watch the bird, and every time it changes what it's doing, we'll mark down what it does. So if it's flying and then stops and walks, we'll put little marks. So we put fly, then we watch it walk, and then we watch it fly again, and then we stop it walk, then maybe it eats. So you just put little marks and keep count of how many times it does these behaviors. So let's do an example. So let's pretend that we're watching this bird. Usually you want to watch for at least 5 minutes, maybe longer. But every time that it changes its behavior, put down a little mark. It might be easier if you do it with somebody. That way you can watch the bird and you don't have to keep looking down and writing things down. They can do that for you. You can just tell the person what it does when it changes. So let's see how many behaviors this bird does. I'm not going to tell you to the end. Okay, you should have seen 4 behaviors. It walked, then it walked, then it ate, and then it flew. You don't have to continuously put walk, 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 walk while it's walking, but if it stops and then starts back again, count it a second time. Okay? So let's go outside and look at some real birds and practice on them. Sometimes you can see some really cool behaviors, like nest building, or feeding their young, or even fighting with other birds for food. So I went out and watched a bird for about 15 minutes, and I observed all of these behaviors, and I kept count of how many times it did each of those. Once you have your data, you can graph it. So this is a little easier to see what it did and how many times it did that. So you can look at this graph and see that most of the time it was hopping and walking while it looked for things to eat. Occasionally it would fly away, or it would stop and turn, and only a couple of times after it flew did it sing. You can also calculate the percentages of time that it did each of these things. So there's lots of things you can do with this information, but this is called a bird ethogram. So in addition to looking for the birds themselves, you can also look for signs of birds, like tracks, or feathers on the ground, or nests. So here's some evidence of woodpecker holes on this tree. But you can tell what kind of woodpecker it is. Most woodpeckers peck on dead trees, and they excavate a big hole looking for bugs. But this tree is alive. So is the woodpecker looking for bugs? It's looking for sap. So if you see little holes like this in a live tree, it's from a yellow-bellied sapsucker. So here's a robin's nest. Now it's important to remember that a nest is not the bird's home. The nest is just built to lay eggs. It's a crib for the babies. And they make them out of all sorts of materials. This one has been made out of sticks and leaves and mud. If you find a nest like this, don't take it. It's actually against the law to collect bird nests, because the birds often return next year and reuse the same nest. They just repair it. So don't take nests if you find them. Some species of birds, like cardinals and robins, are here year-round. But most species are what we call seasonal migrants. In the fall, they fly way down to Central and South America, but return in the spring and stay all summer to lay eggs and raise their young. So this is a very important breeding habitat for many species of birds. In fact, the Audubon Society has designated the Highlands Plateau as an important bird area. And the Highlands Botanical Garden is part of the North Carolina Birding Trail. So I encourage you to go out and try to find as many birds as you can. If nothing else, just sit and watch your bird feeders for about 20 minutes. Even if you aren't able to identify them, you should be able to see how many different kinds of birds are visiting your feeder. If you do want to try to identify them, there are many websites available, or you can get you a nice field guide like this. It has pictures of different kinds of birds, but be sure that you check the range map. If it only lives in Canada or California or Mexico, that's not the bird you're seeing. If you would like to know what kind of birds live in our area, the Highlands Plateau Audubon Society has created a species checklist, and that's available on our website. So please visit us at highlandsbiological.org, and happy bird watching!